Seuss is a figure that many people alive today are somewhat familiar with. His success with children's books was so widespread that he has influenced children throughout the world over the span of multiple generations. What you may not know about Dr. Seuss is that he was a cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan themes, though they are subtle, can be seen in many of his books. This biography will examine his life and the influences that made Seuss a cosmopolitan, in order to illuminate his philosophical views on cosmopolitanism. It will also highlight the cosmopolitan themes in a few of Seuss's books. Dr. Seuss, given name Theodore Seuss Geisel, was born in Springfield, Massachusetts on March 2, 1904. Even in his very early life, Geisel had experiences that would shape his future cosmopolitanism. As a young child during World War I, Geisel was teased for being German. He was called names such as Kaiser for Kaiser Wilhelm, and sometimes had things thrown at him on his way home from school. He was just a young boy at this point, but these experiences had a lasting impact on Seuss and may have offered him a valuable perspective that helped shape his future writings. Seuss was a lifelong traveler. He met his first wife, Helen Palmer, while studying at Oxford in England. He traveled to many places throughout his life, and one notable trip to Kenya helped inspire one of his most famous books, The Lorax. The trees outside the hotel he was staying at inspired the iconic truffula trees in the book. The goal of The Lorax was to get children thinking about the environment and the way humans treat it. The Lorax characters spoke for the trees because they had no voices of their own. Seuss embodied cosmopolitanism and his tendency to draw inspiration from different sources, including different cultures and nations. His book, The Lorax, also demonstrated his commitment to the environment, which is a global cause all humans can get behind, and one thing that connects all of humanity. Seuss's views on the United States' involvement in World War II also pointed to his cosmopolitan nature. They embody a pious concept of our obligation to strangers, no matter how far away they may be. Seuss was staunchly in support of U.S. intervention in the war long before the United States did eventually get involved. Seuss was so determined to help his fellow man that he quit writing children's books temporarily and spent 2 years working as a political cartoonist for New York's PM newspaper. His cartoons satirized isolationists, encouraging Americans to support the idea of U.S. intervention. They also criticized discrimination against African Americans and Jews. At the time, in the early 1940s, discrimination against both of these groups was legal and very common even in the U.S. Seuss's commitment to helping those in Europe and Asia being ravaged by the war demonstrates his cosmopolitanism, as did his early opposition to discrimination. When the war had ended, Seuss began bringing his cosmopolitan messages into his children's books. Yertle the Turtle chronicles the tale of a turtle king named Yertle, who demands that his fellow turtles create a stack for him to stand on top of so he can see great sights. This story was written as an analogy to Hitler and Nazism. The turtle, like Hitler, rose to power by standing on the backs of others. It simplifies these themes so that even a child could understand them. In the end, the turtle on the bottom, Mac, burps, and the burp topples the whole tower of turtles. The book ends with a poignant idea. Turtles, of course, all the turtles are free, as turtles and maybe all creatures should be. This book points to Seuss's respect for all mankind, in this case all turtle kind, and disparages authoritarianism for creating a hierarchy that devalues those at the bottom. The story of the Sneetches was also inspired by World War II and the unequal treatment of Jewish people that can also be expanded to other oppressed groups as well. Sneetches are made-up creatures, some of whom have stars on their bellies and some of whom don't. In the story, the Sneetches with stars on their bellies discriminate against the Sneetches without stars. With this book, Seuss points out that discrimination based on things like race and ethnicity is arbitrary by choosing an arbitrary marker to determine an in-group and out-group in the book. This again demonstrates Seuss's commitment to speaking out against discrimination. Horton Hears a Who was actually inspired by Seuss's visit to Japan a few years after World War II. In this book, an entire town of very tiny people live on a speck and are in grave danger. Horton the elephant hears the tiny people calling out for help and determines to help them even though it requires sacrifice. He leaves his cool spot in the pool and spends the entire day helping the Whos even though it poses some trouble for him. This, once again, demonstrates Seuss's great regard for Rapaya's concept of our obligation to strangers. This book was inspired by the plight of the Japanese after the destruction of World War II, but it can also be relevant to many other groups. The infamous line from the book, "A person's a person no matter how small," could refer to anything, not just stature. It could easily refer to race, ethnicity, religion, etc. Seuss emphasizes the need to see the personhood or humanity in all people, which embraces the theory of cosmopolitanism. The Butter Battle Book was a very literal metaphor for the arms race during the Cold War. Once again, Seuss made the differences between the characters incredibly minute and arbitrary. The Yuks and the Zooks became involved in an arms race of sorts over the difference of how each group buttered their bread. The clear message is that our differences are minor and do not justify violence. This is another theme of cosmopolitanism, that we have more in common than not in common as human beings. Dr. Seuss was a cosmopolitan who shared his notions with children in the hopes of inspiring them to be cosmopolitans themselves. He believed that his work was of great importance in that it had the power to inspire the next generation. Seuss once said, "Children's reading and children's thinking are the rock-bottom base upon which this country will rise or not rise." In these days of tension and confusion, writers are beginning to realize that books for children have a greater potential for good or evil than any other form of literature on earth.